Think for a moment about the dreams every little girl carries inside her. One day, she might have walked into her kindergarten classroom, clutching a backpack almost bigger than she was, smiling shyly at her teacher. In the years ahead, she might have discovered a passion, perhaps art, music, science, or storytelling. She might have grown into a young woman with ambition, ready to chase her destiny, ready to step into the purpose for which she was created. Maybe she would have fallen in love, stood at the altar in a white dress, and one day cradled children of her own, telling them stories, guiding them with wisdom, and building a family legacy. That little girl had endless possibilities. She had a future to shape, a destiny to fulfill. But for Summer Wells, those dreams never even had the chance to begin. Before she could start her very first year of school, before her life could truly open up, she vanished without a trace. Too young for school, too young to vanish. Her story is one of heartbreak, unanswered questions, and a silence that echoes louder with every passing year. Today, we look at how something as simple as starting school might have changed the course of her case, and why her disappearance remains one of the most haunting mysteries of our time. So sit back, stay with us, and as you do, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video. Every like, every comment, every share keeps Summer's name alive and helps bring awareness that could one day unlock the truth. Summer Moon Utah Wells was not just another little girl. She was the heartbeat of her family. Born in June 2016, she was the youngest of 4 children, the only daughter among 3 older brothers. Her blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and playful personality made her stand out, and those who knew her often described her as energetic, bold, and full of love. Life in the rural hills of Beech Creek, Tennessee was quiet, simple, and sometimes isolating. The Wells family lived in a modest home on Ben Hill Road, surrounded by forest and winding paths. It was not the kind of neighborhood where children walked to school every morning or played on bustling sidewalks. For Summer, her world was much smaller, shaped almost entirely by the people within her home, her extended family, and the church she attended. Unlike her brothers, who boarded the school bus and spent their days in classrooms, Summer stayed at home. At 5 years old, she was just on the edge of starting kindergarten. Her parents had registered her, and she was supposed to begin later that year. But until then, her days were spent in the company of her mother, Candace, and her grandmother, often outside playing, exploring the yard, or helping with small chores. For most children, school acts as a bridge between home and the wider world. It's where teachers notice their personalities, classmates form friendships, and absences raise immediate questions. But for Summer, there was no roll call, no teacher to notice her absence, no school bus driver to confirm her presence that day. Her world was a bubble, safe in some ways, but vulnerable in others. Yet, Summer did have one small connection outside of home, her church. The Wells family attended the local Seventh-day Adventist church, where Summer participated in Sabbath school, a children's class similar to Sunday school in other denominations. Her Sabbath school teacher, Robin Lane, remembered her vividly. The way Summer would run into her arms, sometimes climbing into her lap during lessons, full of affection and curiosity. In that setting, Summer was more than just a little girl at home. She was a beloved part of a spiritual family. Still, Sabbath school only met once a week. Unlike daily school, it didn't provide the same consistent record of her presence, her behavior, or her well-being. It was a glimpse into her personality, but not enough to offer investigators the kind of timeline they desperately needed when she disappeared. In Summer's short life, education was just around the corner. She was on the brink of entering a new season, where her world would have expanded to include teachers, classmates, and new opportunities. But she never made it there. The little girl who should have walked into kindergarten with a backpack and bright eyes was instead remembered for the mystery of how she vanished before ever taking that first step. June 15th, 2021 should have been just another summer day for the Wells family. The Tennessee sun was high, the air was heavy with heat, and for 5-year-old Summer Wells, it began like so many others, with family close by and no school routine to pull her away from home. That morning, Summer's mother, Candace Bly, and her grandmother, often called Grandma Candace, had errands to run. Summer was with them, moving between her grandmother's camper and the family's home. According to her mother, it was a day of chores, small tasks, and family time. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. By the afternoon, Summer was reportedly planting flowers with her mother and grandmother outside. It was a simple, wholesome image, a little girl in the dirt, laughing and helping, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. This moment would later become one of the final confirmed memories of Summer before she vanished. Candace later said that after planting flowers, Summer wanted to go inside. Her brothers were in the house watching TV or playing games. She followed her mother indoors for a moment, and then, according to Candace, Summer told her she wanted to go downstairs to play with her toys. And then, silence. Within minutes, Summer was no longer in the basement, no longer outside, no longer anywhere her family could see or hear. Her mother called for her, her brother searched, her grandmother looked around the property, and soon panic began to rise in the Wells home on Ben Hill Road. The family reported that Summer had been gone only a few minutes before they realized something was terribly wrong. The call to 911 was placed at 6:30 p.m., sparking what would become one of the largest search efforts in Tennessee history. But here's what makes her case uniquely chilling. Because Summer was not yet enrolled in school, there was no teacher to notice her absence that morning. There was no attendance record, no structured oversight outside her family. Her last day, like so many before it, existed only in the memories and statements of those closest to her. Unlike children already in classrooms, her world was smaller, her timeline more fragile, and her disappearance even harder to anchor and verify details. This ordinary summer day, filled with errands, flowers, and family, transformed into the darkest chapter in the Wells family's life. A little girl who should have been preparing for her first day of kindergarten instead became the center of a heartbreaking mystery. The moment the 911 call went out on June 15, 2021 at 6:30 p.m., Hawkins County Sheriff's Office and first responders knew this was serious. A 5-year-old child missing in the remote hills of Beech Creek wasn't just a case of a child wandering off. Every passing second meant the difference between rescue and tragedy. Within minutes, deputies arrived at the Wells property on Ben Hill Road. Their first assumption was the most natural. Maybe Summer had simply wandered into the woods. The property sat on rugged, heavily forested terrain with steep hills, thick brush, and winding trails that could easily swallow up a child. But as night began to fall and officers called her name into the darkening trees, no little voice answered back. By the next morning, the search had exploded into a massive, coordinated effort. Helicopters circled above, drones scanned the hills, K-9 units tracked scents. Hundreds of volunteers poured in from neighboring towns, combing through fields, streams, barns, and abandoned structures. At its peak, more than 1,000 searchers were on the ground. One of the largest search operations in Tennessee history. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, the FBI, and state and local law enforcement agencies all joined forces. They described the terrain as some of the most difficult search conditions imaginable. High temperatures, thick undergrowth, venomous snakes, and dangerous drop-offs made every step risky. Yet people pressed on, desperate to find even the smallest clue of where Summer had gone. But here's where her lack of school enrollment became painfully evident again. If a child disappears from school grounds, investigators can reconstruct a precise timeline. Who last saw them, what they were wearing, when they were present or absent. For Summer, there was none of that. The only timeline came from family accounts, and the only witnesses were those inside her home and yard that day. Her Sabbath school teacher, Robin Lane, quickly stepped forward in shock. The child who had run into her arms at church every week, full of laughter and affection, was suddenly at the center of a statewide search. Robin described Summer as precious, a child who loved singing hymns and clinging close to those she trusted. She urged the public to pray and keep hope alive. Meanwhile, the local community was rocked. Yellow ribbons appeared on mailboxes and trees. Candlelight vigils were held, with neighbors and strangers alike gathering to pray for her safe return. The Wells family's small home became the focal point of national attention, with news crews, reporters, and search teams converging on the once quiet rural road. But even as hope burned bright, something else began to creep in. Questions. How could a 5-year-old simply vanish in such a short time? Why had no one outside her home seen her that day? And why, despite the massive manpower, technology, and determination, was there still no trace of little Summer? The search that began with urgency and unity would soon give way to tension, theories, and suspicion. But in those first days, the world only saw a small community desperate to find one missing child. A child who should have been in a classroom, but instead was lost somewhere in the Tennessee hills. As days turned into weeks, the story of Summer Wells burst beyond the borders of Hawkins County. Major news networks, podcasts, and YouTube channels picked up the case. The public, already gripped by high-profile missing child stories, latched on to every detail of this little girl's disappearance. From the very beginning, the mystery carried an unnerving weight. There was no confirmed abduction, no evidence of foul play, and yet there was also no sign of an accident. No trace in the woods, no clothing, no footprints, no body. It was as if Summer had simply vanished into thin air. The media quickly painted two major paths. One, the stranger danger theory. Had someone slipped onto the rural property, spotted Summer playing outside, and taken her without anyone noticing? While Hawkins County was remote, it wasn't immune to crime. Yet, no witnesses reported a suspicious vehicle, and the steep gravel roads made it difficult for anyone to come and go unnoticed. 2. The family involvement theory. Hard as it was to imagine, investigators couldn't ignore the possibility that answers might lie within the home itself. Interviews with her parents, Candace Bly and Dawn Wells, soon became center stage. Their emotional pleas for Summer's safe return were broadcast across the country, but the public reaction was divided. Some saw heartbroken parents clinging to hope. Others noticed inconsistencies, tone shifts, and moments of unease. The absence of school in Summer's daily routine also became part of the public conversation. In communities across America, when a child is absent from school even for a single day, questions are asked, attendance is noted, and sometimes social workers get involved. But Summer, who had only attended Sabbath school at her church, had no such daily oversight. For investigators, this meant no teachers, no bus drivers, no classmates to question about her behavior leading up to that fateful day. It left a void that only deepened suspicion. Meanwhile, armchair detectives and social media sleuths flooded the case with speculation. Some dug through the Wells family's history, others analyzed interviews frame by frame. Rumors spread quickly. Some based on real findings, many based only on guesswork. National media outlets framed Summer's story as both tragic and haunting. They compared it to other missing child cases where answers took years or never came at all. And as each press conference passed without major breakthroughs, frustration built. The TBI and FBI were bombarded with tips, many of them dead ends. Search efforts continued but yielded nothing. Reporters pressed law enforcement. Was this an abduction, an accident? Did the family know more than they were saying? Authorities only repeated one thing: we are looking at every possibility. By this stage, the Wells property was no longer just a family home. It had become a stage, a symbol, and the beating heart of an American mystery. And with that spotlight came both empathy and judgment. The world was watching, and as the weeks dragged on with no answers, one truth began to emerge. The longer Summer Wells remained missing, the harder it would be to believe she'd ever be found alive. As the search widened and the media attention grew louder, the spotlight turned sharply onto Dawn Wells and Candace Bly, Summer's parents. Their faces were on news broadcasts, their voices carried through emotional pleas. But instead of reassurance, their appearances often raised more questions than answers. Dawn Wells, Summer's father, became the most outspoken. He appeared on multiple interviews, sometimes sober and grieving, other times defensive and agitated. At times, his words carried the raw pain of a father longing for his daughter. Yet, at other moments, his tone shifted, speaking about how evil had crept into his family, or how he feared Summer was gone forever. For some viewers, this was a man drowning in sorrow. For others, it was unsettling, almost as if he had accepted her loss too soon. Candace Bly, Summer's mother, was more reserved, often standing quietly by Dawn's side during interviews. When she did speak, her words sometimes seemed flat or rehearsed, which led critics to question whether she was hiding something. Yet others defended her, pointing out that grief doesn't look the same for everyone. Some cry endlessly, some go numb, and some appear detached simply as a survival mechanism. But it wasn't just what they said, it was what was missing. When asked about the timeline of that June day, their stories sometimes shifted slightly. A detail here, a phrasing there. In high-stakes cases like this, the public clings to every word, and even the smallest inconsistency can fuel suspicion. Then there was the matter of the family's past. Reports surfaced of tension, prior arrests, and a history of struggles that painted a more complicated picture of life in the Wells household. For investigators, this meant that they couldn't simply rule out the possibility that something had happened to Summer inside her own home. Public perception split down the middle. One group saw grieving parents vilified unfairly, trying their best in the face of tragedy. Another saw potential red flags, convinced the truth was being hidden in plain sight. And yet one heartbreaking reality lingered. Summer Wells was gone, and every minute spent analyzing her parents on TV was another minute with no answers about where she had gone. Educational disadvantages. Life in rural Hawkins County means opportunities for children can look very different than in suburban or city communities. Many families choose homeschooling, church-based programs, or non-traditional learning paths. For Summer, the primary structured environment outside her home was Sabbath school at her Seventh-day Adventist church. Her teacher, Robin Lane, remembered her as affectionate, playful, and full of curiosity, a child who brought joy into that weekly classroom. But Sabbath school only met once a week for a few hours. Unlike a full-time school environment, it offered limited oversight. There was no daily attendance, no teacher monitoring her well-being, and no peer network consistently observing her growth or moods. If there were subtle signs of stress, tension, or danger, they might have gone unnoticed. In traditional schools, missing children cases benefit from multiple layers of accountability. Teachers notice absences, classmates notice changes, school nurses and counselors track health and social well-being. Summer had none of that. Her world was small, intimate, and heavily reliant on family. While her home and church offered love and care, the lack of a broader educational safety net left her effectively invisible to the community when she disappeared. This absence of a structured educational environment also meant no formal records, no teacher reports, no medical documentation for school entry, and no class observations to help investigators reconstruct her daily life. For those examining the case, this created a critical gap in evidence and timeline verification. Some child advocates highlight a difficult truth here. Children outside the daily school system can unintentionally become invisible to authorities and community networks. In Summer's case, this invisibility added an extra layer of difficulty to an already urgent investigation. While Sabbath school provided joy, faith, and a few caring adults who knew Summer, it could not serve as the same protective daily framework that public schooling would have. This educational gap became one of the subtle yet devastating factors in the unfolding mystery. Dawn and Candace insisted again and again they loved their daughter. They had nothing to do with their disappearance. But in the eyes of the public, and perhaps even in the eyes of investigators, they were no longer just victims. They had become suspects of circumstance, a family crushed by tragedy, yet shadowed by doubt. At the heart of it all was one haunting truth. Summer Wells was gone. As the first 48 hours passed, law enforcement faced a daunting reality. Summer Wells had disappeared without a trace in rugged rural terrain. Hawkins County Sheriff's Office, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, and later the FBI converged on Ben Hill Road, each bringing specialized tools, experience, and manpower, but even their collective effort met with frustrating silence. The geography alone was a formidable adversary. Thick forests, uneven hills, hidden creeks, and dense underbrush made searching treacherous. Every footprint, every disturbed patch of earth could hold a clue, or mislead the investigation entirely. Search teams often had to physically climb hills while dogs tracked scents through near impenetrable vegetation. Even drones and thermal imaging technology had limited effectiveness under the canopy. But there was another challenge, one invisible yet deeply impactful: Summer's lack of formal schooling. Investigators rely heavily on educational environments to reconstruct a child's daily life. Teachers, classmates, and school staff can provide timelines, notice behavioral changes, or confirm whereabouts. For Summer, there were no such anchors. Her absence from kindergarten or preschool meant that investigators had fewer external witnesses, no structured attendance logs, and no independent verification of her routines. The only insights came from family members, neighbors, and the small circle at her Sabbath school. While her teacher, Robin Lane, recalled Summer fondly, these accounts offered limited practical information about the day of her disappearance. Unlike public school children, Summer had no daily network of adults who could confirm her activities, leaving investigators to piece together a timeline from fragmented recollections. Investigators examined every conceivable scenario. Had Summer wandered off alone into the surrounding woods? Search dogs could only trace faint or disrupted scents. Could an intruder have entered the property? Rural homes are isolated, but no neighbors reported suspicious vehicles or strangers. Was there a family connection to her disappearance? While investigators interviewed the parents and siblings extensively, nothing conclusively pointed to foul play inside the home. Each tip that came in, over 6,500 in the first few weeks, was exhaustively checked. Yet time and again, leads turned cold. Phone records, digital activity, and social media investigations yielded no actionable evidence. The case became a series of dead ends, frustrating authorities and heartbreaking the public. Law enforcement also had to contend with the intense media scrutiny. News crews camped outside the Wells property, public theorists and amateur sleuths flooded social media, and every interview with the family was analyzed and dissected. While this attention kept the story alive, it also added pressure and distraction for investigators working against the clock. Despite all these obstacles, officials remained clear. They would leave no stone unturned. Every tip, no matter how small, was followed. Every search pattern was meticulously executed. Every family member, friend, and neighbor was interviewed multiple times. But the combination of challenging terrain, absence of formal schooling, and the short timeline of her last confirmed sighting created a perfect storm of difficulty. By the end of the first week, one chilling reality became undeniable. Summer Wells' disappearance was not a simple missing child case. It was a complex, high-stakes investigation where every second mattered, and every missing piece of information, including the lack of a daily educational safety net, made finding her exponentially harder. 4 years have passed since Summer Wells vanished from her home in Beech Creek, Tennessee. She was 5 years old, full of life, potential, and dreams yet to be realized. Dreams of starting kindergarten, making friends, discovering new passions, and one day building her own family. Her disappearance remains one of the most haunting mysteries in recent American history. Investigators have scoured forests, searched creeks, interviewed family members, followed thousands of tips, and examined every possible angle, yet Summer's whereabouts remain unknown. Theories continue to swirl. Could a stranger have abducted her in broad daylight, slipping in and out of a remote rural home undetected? Was there a family connection or hidden danger inside the household? Did the lack of a traditional school environment, no daily teachers, no classmates, no attendance logs, leave her invisible to a wider circle that could have noticed signs of distress? Her Sabbath school offered some social and spiritual connection, but it met only once a week, leaving her largely unobserved by the broader community. Investigators relied on family and neighbors, but even with their accounts, gaps in the timeline remain. As the years pass, one thing becomes painfully clear. Summer Wells's case is a reminder of how fragile a child's safety can be in a world where even the smallest gaps in oversight matter. Her story calls on us not only to pray for answers, but to raise awareness and support efforts to find missing children everywhere. Now, we want to hear from you. What do you think really happened to Summer Wells? Could her lack of daily schooling and limited community oversight have played a bigger role than most realize? Do you believe the answers lie close to home or somewhere beyond the hills of Beech Creek? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is part of keeping her story alive. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video. Every like, every comment, and every share helps keep Summer's memory alive and spreads awareness about her case to people who may hold the answers. Summer Wells may still be missing, but through attention, discussion, and relentless hope, we honor her life and fight to bring justice, or at least understanding, to this heartbreaking mystery.